Felix, wake up! Felix, please, open your eyes! Bang Chan's voice tore through the dormitory like an alarm. But Felix didn't move. Only seconds earlier, the dorm had been filled with the ordinary sounds of an exhausted evening, the hum of the air conditioner, the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen, and Changbin laughing at something on his phone. Then came the sound of a glass hitting the floor. Everyone turned. Felix was standing near the kitchen counter, one hand gripping the edge as though the floor beneath him had suddenly shifted. His face had gone frighteningly pale. Felix! Sungmin called. Felix tried to answer, but only a faint breath escaped his lips. Then his knees gave way. The glass shattered. Bang Chan lunged forward and caught him before his head struck the floor. Felix! The entire dorm fell silent. For one terrible second, nobody seemed to know what to do. Hyunjin froze halfway across the living room. Han dropped his phone. Lee No rushed toward them, his expression changing the instant he saw Felix's face. Move back, Lee No said sharply. Give him space. Bang Chan lowered Felix carefully onto the floor. Felix, can you hear me? Nothing. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Someone get the medical kit, Changbin said. I'll call for help, Sungmin answered immediately. Already reaching for his phone, IN stood near the doorway, staring at Felix as though his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. He was fine 5 minutes ago, he whispered. Nobody answered, because they all remembered the same thing. Felix had been smiling. He had been sitting on the couch earlier, laughing quietly while Hyunjin showed him a ridiculous video. He had complained about being tired, but he had done that before. They had all assumed it was another long day. They had been wrong. Bang Chan placed 2 fingers near Felix's neck, desperately trying to remain calm. Come on, Lix, he whispered. Stay with us. Felix's eyelashes trembled. For a moment, everyone thought he was waking up. Then his body went completely still again. Hyunjin covered his mouth. No. The word came out almost inaudibly. Changbin looked toward Bang Chan. Should we take him ourselves? No. Bang Chan shook his head. We wait for professional help. His voice was controlled, but his hands were trembling. That frightened everyone more than anything else. Bang Chan was usually the person who remained calm when everything went wrong. If he was scared, then this was serious. Sungmin knelt beside Felix. Felix, he said softly. It's Seungmin. Can you hear me? Felix gave no response. The smell of broken glass and cold air filled the room. Somewhere outside, traffic continued as though nothing had happened. That ordinary sound felt almost cruel. Han crouched a few feet away, staring at Felix. He told me he wasn't hungry earlier. Lee No looked at him. What? He said he was fine. I asked him if he wanted dinner. Han swallowed hard. He smiled and said he'd eat later. Changbin's expression darkened. Did he say anything else? Han shook his head. No. Hyunjin suddenly stood. I'm going to get his bag. Why? IN asked. He always carries something when he isn't feeling well. Everyone looked at him. Hyunjin stopped. I mean, sometimes. Bang Chan glanced at him. What kind of something? Hyunjin hesitated. I don't know. That answer made the room even quieter. Lee No noticed the hesitation immediately. You know something. Hyunjin looked down. I just noticed he's been carrying that small black pouch everywhere lately. Since when? A few weeks. Bang Chan's eyes narrowed. A few weeks? Hyunjin nodded. He never let anyone touch it. Before anyone could ask another question, Felix suddenly coughed. Everyone turned. His body jerked slightly. Felix! Bang Chan supported his shoulders. Felix opened his eyes. They were unfocused. He looked around the room as if he didn't recognize where he was. Chan! I'm here. Felix tried to sit up. Bang Chan gently stopped him. Don't move. Felix blinked slowly. What happened? You collapsed. Felix stared at him. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked toward the others. Their frightened faces surrounded him. His expression changed. I'm sorry. Those 2 words made Hyunjin's eyes fill with tears. Why are you apologizing? Felix looked away. I scared you. That's not what matters, Changbin said. Felix gave a weak smile. But nobody smiled back. Bang Chan studied his face. Were you feeling sick before this? Felix hesitated. No. Felix. I was just tired. Lee No crossed his arms. You almost lost consciousness. I know. You know? Felix looked at him. I felt dizzy. When? A few days ago. The room went silent again. A few days? Seungmin repeated. Felix nodded. And you didn't tell us? Felix lowered his eyes. I thought it would go away. Bang Chan closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't angry. He was hurt. You don't have to protect us from worrying about you. Felix's lips trembled. I didn't want everyone to stop working because of me. Changbin shook his head. That is exactly why you should have told us. Felix looked down at his hands. For years he had learned to smile through exhaustion. He had learned to say he was fine before anyone could ask twice. He had learned that being dependable sometimes meant hiding the parts of himself that were falling apart. But tonight, his body had betrayed that habit. The siren outside grew louder. Help had arrived. Within minutes, the dorm filled with movement. A medical team entered, checking Felix's vital signs and asking questions. Bang Chan stayed beside him. The others stood back, watching helplessly. Felix answered every question quietly. When asked whether he had experienced dizziness before, he said yes. When asked whether he had been eating properly, he looked away. That was enough. The medical team exchanged concerned glances. Hyunjin noticed. So did Bang Chan. What's wrong? Bang Chan asked. We need to evaluate him properly, one of the responders said. He should be taken in for further assessment. Felix immediately shook his head. No. Bang Chan looked at him. Felix. I'm okay. You're going. Felix stared at him. There was something almost childlike in his expression. I don't want to cause trouble. Bang Chan knelt beside him. You are not trouble. Felix looked away. Your family, Bang Chan continued. And family doesn't get left behind because they're inconvenient. Felix's eyes became wet. He nodded. As they prepared to move him, Hyunjin noticed something on the floor beneath the kitchen table. A small black pouch. He picked it up. The zipper was partially open. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Hyunjin looked at it. His face changed. What is this? Sungmin stepped closer. What? Hyunjin unfolded the paper. There were several handwritten lines. The handwriting was unmistakably Felix's, but the words made no sense. Dates, times, short sentences, and one line circled repeatedly. I can't let them know. Hyunjin's breathing stopped. Bang Chan noticed his expression. What did you find? Hyunjin looked toward Felix. Felix saw the paper in his hand. His eyes widened. Hyunjin. The fear in his voice was different from the fear they had seen earlier. It wasn't fear of being sick. It was fear of being discovered. Give that to me. Hyunjin didn't move. Felix, what is this? Felix reached for the paper. Bang Chan gently caught his wrist. Wait. Felix stared at him. For the first time that night, the carefully constructed smile disappeared completely. I didn't want you to know. Bang Chan's heart sank. Know what? Felix looked at all 8 members. His eyes were filled with exhaustion, fear, and something none of them could immediately understand. I've been pretending I'm okay for a long time. No one spoke. Felix swallowed. And tonight wasn't the first time I almost collapsed. The room seemed to shrink around them. Outside, the city lights continued to flicker through the windows. Inside, the 8 members stood together, realizing that the person they thought they knew might have been carrying a secret much heavier than exhaustion. Felix closed his eyes. I just didn't know how to tell you. Bang Chan tightened his grip around Felix's hand. Then tell us now. Felix opened his eyes again. A tear rolled silently down his cheek. I'm scared. Those words broke something inside the room. Hyunjin looked away, wiping his eyes. Changbin clenched his fists. Han lowered his head. Lee No stood completely still. Seungmin's expression softened. IN stepped closer, and Bang Chan never let go of Felix's hand. For the first time in weeks, Felix didn't have to pretend. He didn't have to smile. He didn't have to say everything was fine. He simply allowed himself to be afraid. And for the first time, the others understood that sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who finally admitted that he needed help. The night continued around them, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The dorm that had always been filled with laughter suddenly became a place of quiet promises. No one blamed Felix. No one asked him why he had hidden everything. They simply stayed, because Felix had spent too long believing that he had to carry his pain alone. Now, 8 people were determined to prove him wrong. And as the ambulance lights disappeared beyond the window, Bang Chan whispered the only thing Felix needed to hear. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Felix closed his eyes. For the first time that night, his breathing became calmer. The fear was still there. The questions were still unanswered. But he was no longer carrying them by himself. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Felix lay quietly beneath the white sheets, his face still pale beneath the soft fluorescent lights. The steady beeping of the monitor beside him was the only sound inside the room. Bang Chan sat beside the bed. He had not moved for nearly an hour. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on Felix's face. Across the room, the others waited in silence. Nobody knew what to say. They had spent years together. They had shared bedrooms, meals, arguments, rehearsals, laughter, exhaustion, and countless nights when sleep seemed impossible. Yet somehow, Felix had managed to hide something from all of them, something serious enough to make him collapse. The door opened. A doctor stepped inside carrying a tablet. Everyone immediately stood. Is he okay? Bang Chan spoke first. The doctor glanced at Felix before looking at the group. His condition is stable at the moment. A collective breath escaped the room. But we still need to understand why he collapsed. Felix slowly opened his eyes. I told you I was just tired. The doctor looked at him calmly. Tired people don't always lose consciousness. Felix looked away. Bang Chan noticed. Felix! I'm listening. Tell the doctor everything. Felix remained silent. The doctor pulled a chair closer. You mentioned dizziness occurring several times recently. Felix nodded. How often? Sometimes in the morning. How long has this been happening? Felix hesitated. A few weeks. Hyunjin's eyes widened. A few weeks? Felix didn't look at him. The doctor continued. Have you been sleeping normally? Felix shook his head. Not really. How many hours? 4, sometimes less. Changbin stared at him. Felix! Felix finally looked toward him. I'm sorry. Stop saying sorry. Changbin's voice cracked. Felix blinked. Changbin looked down, trying to control himself. You keep apologizing like being sick is something you did wrong. The room became quiet. The doctor gave them a moment before continuing. Have you been under unusual stress? Felix nodded. Work? Another nod. Anything else? Felix's fingers tightened around the blanket. He didn't answer. The doctor noticed. Felix, this is important. Felix swallowed. I've been having trouble sleeping because of something. Bang Chan leaned forward. What something? Felix stared at the ceiling. I don't know how to explain it. Try. Felix took a slow breath. Sometimes when everyone is asleep, I hear someone outside the dorm. The room went completely still. Han frowned. Someone? Felix nodded. Footsteps. Lee No's expression hardened. At what time? Usually after midnight. Did you see anyone? No. Then how do you know someone was there? Felix's eyes shifted toward the window. Because sometimes the footsteps stop outside my door. Nobody spoke. The monitor continued beeping. Beep, beep, beep. Felix continued quietly. And sometimes I hear someone whispering. Hyunjin's face lost its color. What do they say? Felix hesitated. My name. A chill passed through the room. IN looked toward the door. Did you tell anyone? No. Why? Felix gave a weak laugh. Because it sounded ridiculous. It doesn't sound ridiculous now, Seungmin said. The doctor remained calm. Have you experienced anything else? Felix nodded. I found things outside my room. What things? Notes. Bang Chan immediately stood. Notes? Felix looked at him. Small pieces of paper. What did they say? Felix's expression became tense. Sometimes nothing. And sometimes, Felix slowly looked toward the black pouch Hyunjin had brought. Sometimes they told me to stop pretending. Everyone looked at the pouch. Hyunjin carefully placed it on the table. You kept all of them. Felix nodded. Why? I thought if I kept them, maybe I could understand who was leaving them. Bang Chan stared at the pouch. Why didn't you tell us? Felix's voice became almost inaudible. Because the first note appeared after someone sent me a message. What message? Felix looked at his phone. He had kept it beside the bed. Slowly, he unlocked the screen. There was one unread message. Bang Chan saw the sender. No name. Just an unknown number. Felix opened it. The message contained only one sentence. I know what you are hiding. Han stepped closer. What does that mean? I don't know. Another message appeared. Everyone froze. Felix's phone vibrated in his hand. A new notification. The sender was the same unknown number. This time, there was no sentence. There was a photograph. Felix stared at it. His breathing stopped. Bang Chan noticed immediately. Felix? Felix didn't answer. What is it? Felix slowly turned the phone around. The photograph showed the entrance of their dormitory. It had been taken from across the street. The timestamp was from earlier that evening. Before Felix collapsed, Hyunjin stepped backward. Someone was watching the dorm? Felix nodded. Bangshan took the phone. He zoomed into the image. A figure stood near a streetlight. The person's face was hidden by the darkness, but one detail was visible: a black hood. Bang Chan's jaw tightened. Did you recognize this person? No. Are you sure? Felix nodded. Then his eyes widened. Wait. What? Felix pointed toward the photograph. Look at the hand. Everyone leaned closer. The person in the photograph was holding something. A small piece of white paper. On it was a single handwritten word. Felix. The room fell silent. The doctor immediately stepped toward the door. I'm going to contact hospital security. Bang Chan nodded. Do it. But Felix suddenly grabbed his wrist. Chan. Bang Chan turned. Don't tell anyone. What? Please. Felix, someone has been watching you. I know. Then we need to report it. Felix shook his head. Not yet. Why? Felix looked terrified. Because if they know I told you, they might come back. Bang Chan stared at him. Let them. Felix's eyes filled with tears. No. His voice trembled. I don't want anything to happen to you. The words silenced everyone. Bang Chan slowly sat beside him. Listen to me. Felix looked at him. You don't protect us by keeping us in the dark. Felix lowered his eyes. Bang Chan continued. You protect us by trusting us. A tear rolled down Felix's cheek. I tried. I know. I really tried. I know. I thought I could handle it. Bang Chan squeezed his hand. You don't have to anymore. Felix closed his eyes. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Lee No spoke. We need to find out who that person is. Seungmin nodded. But carefully. Changbin looked toward the window. And we need to know what Felix thinks he's hiding. Felix opened his eyes. The room became quiet again. He stared at them. I can tell you. Bang Chan nodded. Then tell us. Felix took a deep breath. I received the first message 3 weeks ago. He paused. It said someone from our past had been watching us. Han frowned. Someone from our past. Felix nodded. I ignored it. What happened next? Another message came 2 days later. What did it say? Felix looked down. It said, his voice broke. One of us would be the reason everything fell apart. Nobody spoke. The words seemed to settle over the room like smoke. Hyunjin slowly looked at the others. One of us. Felix nodded. I thought it was a threat. Bang Chan's expression hardened. Maybe it still is. Felix shook his head. There's more. Everyone waited. Felix reached for the black pouch. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were folded notes. Dozens of them. Some were old. Some were recent. Felix spread them across. Bang Chan picked up the first one. His expression changed. What? Bang Chan didn't answer. He handed it to Seungmin. Seungmin read it, then looked up. This isn't possible. What? Seungmin held the note tightly. This was written before we moved into this dorm. The room went silent. Felix looked at him. Exactly. Hyunjin stared at the notes. Then whoever wrote these knew where we were going before we even moved. Felix nodded. His voice was barely audible. And that's why I was afraid. Bang Chan looked at the scattered papers. For the first time, the situation no longer felt like a strange collection of coincidences. Someone had been watching. Someone had known things they shouldn't have known. And Felix had been carrying the evidence alone. The doctor returned to the room with hospital security. But before anyone could explain what had happened, Felix's phone vibrated again. Everyone turned. Another message. This time, only 4 words appeared on the screen. You should have listened. Felix's face went completely pale. Bang Chan stared at the message. Then the hospital light suddenly flickered. Once, twice. And the monitor beside Felix began making a strange, irregular sound. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For the first time, even Felix didn't know what to say. The light stopped flickering. The monitor returned to its normal rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Everyone remained frozen for a few seconds. Then the doctor stepped toward Felix. Are you feeling dizzy again? Felix shook his head. No. Bang Chan looked at the security officer. Can you trace the message? We'll try, the officer replied. But don't respond to it. Felix stared at his phone. For weeks, he had lived with the fear that someone was watching him. Tonight, that fear had finally become real. But as he looked around the room, he realized something else. He wasn't alone anymore. Bang Chan was still beside him. Changbin stood near the door. Lee No was carefully examining the notes. Hyunjin was sitting quietly, his eyes fixed on Felix. Han was holding Felix's jacket. Sungmin was speaking with security. In remained close to the bed. Every one of them had stayed. Felix's eyes filled with tears. I thought if I told you, everything would become worse. Bang Chan shook his head. It became worse because you carried it alone. Felix looked down. I was scared. I know. I didn't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Bang Chan squeezed his hand. Then let us decide together what happens next. For the first time, Felix smiled. It wasn't his usual bright smile. It was smaller, tired, but genuine. The following hours were spent answering questions and reviewing the evidence. Security checked the hospital cameras. They discovered that someone had indeed been near the hospital entrance. But the person had disappeared before security arrived. There was no clear face, no usable identification. Nothing that could immediately explain who they were. Still, one thing became clear. Felix had not imagined everything. Someone had been following him. Someone had been sending the messages. And someone had known information about the group that should have remained private. The police were contacted, and the messages and notes were preserved as evidence. Felix eventually rested. The others remained in the room. Nobody wanted to leave him alone. At around 4 in the morning, Felix opened his eyes. The room was quiet. Bang Chan had fallen asleep in the chair beside him. Changbin was asleep against the wall. Han had his arms crossed over his chest. Hyunjin was curled up on the couch. Lee No was awake, staring through the window. Felix watched them silently. He felt something warm in his chest. Not relief exactly, something deeper. He finally understood. That family wasn't simply the people who laughed with you when everything was easy. Family was also the people who stayed when you were frightened. The people who noticed when your smile wasn't real. The people who refused to let you disappear behind your own silence. Felix slowly reached for Bang Chan's hand. Bang Chan woke immediately. You okay? Felix nodded. Yeah. Bang Chan smiled sleepily. Good. Felix hesitated. Chan? Thank you. Bang Chan squeezed his hand. You don't need to thank me. Felix looked around the room. I thought I had to be strong all the time. Bang Chan shook his head. You only have to be honest. Felix closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe enough to sleep. Several days later, Felix returned to the dorm. The atmosphere was different. The same furniture stood in the same places. The same kitchen was filled with the same familiar sounds. But something had changed. The members had become more attentive. They checked on each other without making it obvious. They ate together. They talked more. And whenever Felix became quiet, nobody forced him to explain. They simply stayed nearby. The investigation continued. But the person behind the messages was never conclusively identified. The unknown number stopped sending messages. The footsteps outside the dorm disappeared. The notes stopped appearing. Eventually, the fear began to fade. Not completely. Some mysteries remained. Felix still kept the black pouch. Not because he was afraid anymore, but because it reminded him of the night he finally stopped pretending. One evening, the members gathered in the living room. Han was laughing loudly. Changbin complained about the food. Seungmin argued with Lee No over the television. Hyunjin was taking pictures. In was trying to steal snacks. Bang Chan watched them all with a quiet smile. Felix sat in the middle of them. He laughed. A real laugh. A peaceful one. Bang Chan glanced at him. You okay? Felix nodded. Yeah. This time everyone believed him. Because now they